there's a couple of examples when I first saw him. One is maybe a crude example, but when we were growing up in the 50s, we saw black and white TV, and then color. It was like exciting to see. It was like eye candy. So, when I first saw Prabhupada, it was like the first time I saw color TV. Everything else was black and white, with shades of gray. But another example I think that's a little more appropriate is that I really feel it was the first time I saw reality, because Prabhupada actually knew who he was, and he was the only person that I knew who was in reality. He knew who God was, he knew why I was here, and he knew what his purpose was, what his, I had taken some courses in college in theater and drama, and so there was always this discussion about your inner monologue, and which gave you your motivation, why you did what you did, and being efficient with your movement. And I saw that when I showed Srila Prabhupada, that he was the first. I could see that every movement was saturated with devotion. He didn't do anything that wasn't. Even if he was just walking to see the deities, Radha Govinda in New York, he was he was walking to see Krishna. It wasn't just walking in front of people. He was walking to see Krishna. Everything was devotional, and every movement, there was nothing frivolous. It was very efficient.
The day before, I'd gotten Brahmin initiated, Brahmin initiation, I should say, directly by Srila Prabhupada. So, which was a very ecstatic thing for me, obviously. But so, the first morning that I said my Gayatri mantra, I thought, well, I'll go down to Lake Michigan, because we were in Evanston, and Northwestern University was only a few blocks away, and then Lake Michigan was there. And there was a nice park that they had built along the shoreline there, the lakefront. So I thought, I'm going to go down by the lake, and when the sun starts rising, I'll say my Gayatri mantra. So I chanted down there, and I got all set to say my Gayatri mantra, and up drives the Ford Lincoln Continental again. So door opens, and out steps His loving divine grace, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada was about maybe 30 yards from me. And I said, Jai Srila Prabhupada, right? And I offered my obeisances. But Prabhupada's back was to me. So then all these sannyasis got out. Brahmananda was there as well. And Satsarup was there. And so they all kind of gathered, and when everyone was ready, Prabhupada turned and started walking right towards me. Meantime, I'm saying, I got the paper slip there, because I hadn't even memorized the Gayatri mantra yet, and I was saying my Gayatri mantra as Prabhupada's walking by. So Prabhupada comes by, and he says, why is he not offering obeisances? Which I actually had offered obeisances, but Prabhupada, his back was turned. This was like a really important lesson for me. So he said, why he's not offering obeisances? And they said, well, Prabhupada, he's chanting his Gayatri mantra. Prabhupada said, what is the value of such chanting when the spiritual master comes by and you do not offer obeisances? Now, I didn't hear that exactly. Otherwise, obviously I would offer my obeisances immediately. But Prabhupada said that. And so, and then he walked on. So what I was doing, I was trying to get this thing done really quick so I could go on the walk. So Sudama knew me. Pragosh was on his party, and we were friends since our childhood, and so he knew me, and so I I got done with my Gayatri Mantra, and I went running up to catch up with the morning walk. So Sudama sees me coming up, and so he comes to the back of the group, and I go, "Is it all right, March, if I come?" And he goes, "Why didn't you offer your obeisances?" I said, "I did." He says, "When?" He said, "When Prabhupada got out of the car, I offered my obeisances." He said, "Well, Prabhupada didn't see it." And then he told me what Prabhupada said. And immediately, like, I couldn't breathe. I was suffocating. I was like, "Oh God, what is my worth? Why should I live another moment?" So, I actually carried that for a long time. I mean, and another thing happened. Prabhupada chastised me once when I was in Vrindavan. And like 25 years later, you know, after that incident on a Vyas Puja, I wrote one offering in glorification of Prabhupada. And I wrote how you had chastised me for doing this, which actually helped me for the rest of my life. Because never, since that time, have I not offered my obeisances before Gayatri Mantra and after saying Gayatri Mantra. And if I'm sitting in front of the deities and the curtain opens and there's Jagat Guru sitting on the altar, I'm offering obeisances. So sometimes I see devotees, they're chanting Gayatri Mantra, and the deities open, this happened, Prabhupada, you know, and they're just chanting. And I'm thinking, you're off. What is the value of this chanting? So I wrote this offering to Prabhupada 25 years later, first of all, apologizing to Srila Prabhupada for committing an offense and thanking Srila Prabhupada. That was just a few words. It impregnated my heart with so much love and appreciation for the spiritual master that I never took him, I was never familiar or took him lightly, ever again. And even though I didn't think I was taken lightly then, but then I redoubled my determination to appreciate what it means to be in association of the Jagat Guru.
When Srila Prabhupada visited Mauritius, one of the Prime Minister, Sir Siu Sagar Ramgulam, he was one of his henchmen, one of his right-hand men, was very friendly to the devotees. And Ramgulam, I mean, in Mauritius, the kind of apartheid mentality of South Africa spilled over in those days, although officially there was no apartheid. But still, most of the few French families were like employing the rest of the population. So when Ramgulam heard that Prabhupada was having white people bow down to him, they were really impressed. So they wanted Prabhupada to come. So Ramgulam asked the devotees, "You please draft a letter that will induce your spiritual master to come." So the devotees kind of gave a hint, and he wrote to Prabhupada, "Will your holiness please come and bless our island with, and please bring your Krishna consciousness movement, head of state." Signed it and sent it. And I learned from listening to Brahmananda on your excellent tapes that Prabhupada was a little reluctant to travel at that time, but due to having been invited by a head of state, he took it up and he came, and he was escorted like right off the plane by Mr. Tilak, who was Secretary of Parliament to Agriculture, for Agriculture in those days, and very nice reception was held in the VIP lounge where foreign heads of state go through, you know. And it was the first time Prabhupada had such a reception. The first words out of his mouth, Yad Yadach Rishtas Tata Devetaro Jana. Whatever the leaders do, common man will follow. So he was quite... Actually, I'm researching to write a book on Prabhupada's visit. And throughout his visit, he was meditating on this. He gave so many instructions on how to set up a perfect Krishna conscious society. And actually Mr. Tilak, he brought about 40 members of parliament and diplomats, heads of state, to meet with Prabhupada, and for about 40 minutes he gave them a blueprint of how to set up a perfect, ideal society. And then he had them send that tape back to Godhead magazine. And in January 1976 they printed a little excerpt of that. And then unfortunately the tape's lost. It's no longer in the archives. But Srila Prabhupada very nicely says that Vedic society is based on love. And in a small place like Mauritius, a perfect society can be set up. He says in a highly industrialized state, now it's no longer possible, something to that effect. But he says in a place like Mauritius it can be done. And he said we don't have to invent anything new. The example is already given there of perfect Vedic societies in the Vedic histories. And he said that a perfect society is based on love, not on law. He says if the citizens love you, then they will automatically want to follow your laws. But first there must be love. So then we must put in the center. And he said Bhagavad Gita teaches that if we govern according to Bhagavad Gita, we'll get perfect society. It's very nice.
There was one morning walk. I was invited by Satsrupa to go on a morning walk one morning in Dallas. And we went out and there was a sign. We went into a nice subdivision in Dallas area, fairly well-to-do place, and there was one sign, beware of the dog, you know. So Prabhupada commented, beware of the dog, you know, and so everybody could understand he was talking about the man in the house, not the dog. So Prabhupada had this incredible sense of humor, a great sense of sarcasm sometimes, and that was one time it evidenced.
After Prabhupada disappeared in 77, we kept doing libraries, but then in 78, Petit Udharana in Bombay, he asked me if, Satsrupa had asked him if he would help with the Lilamrita. Then I said, oh, what's that work you're doing? And he goes, well, I don't know if I can do it. Are you interested? And I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And then, then I picked it up. I contacted Satsrupa. They got me a tape recorder, gave me some money and said, okay, here's what you do. You go interview different people. Just go all over India and interviewing people. And I said, fantastic. My problem was I wouldn't stay long enough in a place, but sometimes I'd go to a place and I couldn't always meet a person. Then I'd leave to come back and meet them again. So at this time in Delhi, because there was one Pandit who was Prabhupada's first disciple, Acharya Prabhakar Mishra, and he was a Sanskrit scholar, not only a Sanskrit scholar, but also he was very cultured. He had MA, PhD, everything. And he had been actually teaching Sanskrit. And Prabhupada went to Jhansi, and he actually told Acharya Prabhakar, he said, I came here because in a dream I saw you and I knew I was supposed to come. So then I came to Jhansi, and then that's when Prabhupada says, I met you for this reason. And so then he was there. He was a very cultured man. I was impressed by his demeanor. He was very well clean-cut and very well behaved and very articulate because he was a scholar. And Prabhupada, when he was there with him, they would do bhajan together. They'd actually go out and do Rath Yatra, small Rath Yatra. They'd go do programs in other cities and everything around the area, small villages. And Acharya Prabhakar said that one night he had to go to Delhi. It was actually Krishna Janmashtami. He had to go to Delhi. He came back, took a little rest. Then he woke up. It was 1 a.m., and this was 1954, Janmashtami. And he said that he could hear Prabhupada playing Mridanga in the temple room, and it was very ecstatic. So he went upstairs, and when he saw Prabhupada there, Prabhupada was bouncing around the temple room doing kirtan, and he was wearing this long garland all the way down to his feet. And Prabhupada was just in total bliss chanting. So Acharya Prabhakar was watching this, and he thought it was very strange because these were Kadamba flowers, and Kadamba flowers aren't real common in Jhansi. They're very rare in that area. And, but the other interesting things is Kadamba flowers are usually about this big, about the size of a golf ball. And the ones that were on Prabhupada's garland were the size of tennis balls. And this was pretty bizarre because it was very big. And the other thing was the aroma that was in the air. He called it upakrit, non-material atmosphere, because he was a Sanskritist. And he wanted to ask Srila Prabhupada, well, what was this? Where did this come from? This just doesn't, you can't buy it in the market, this garland. And the atmosphere was so surcharged. He said it smelled like heavenly planets, the aroma. So Prabhupada wouldn't answer. He just kept doing kirtan, bouncing around the temple room, chanting. Then the next morning, he asked Srila Prabhupada, what went on? What was this? Where did you get the garland from? Why did it smell so much? And why were you feeling so blissful? And Srila Prabhupada told him that I was feeling some love for Krishna, and I was chanting to him, and he appeared and gave me this garland, and I went to touch his feet or grab his feet, and then he disappeared. And that was it. And he said, because of that, I was dancing around the temple room. And he was crying, Prabhupada was crying and everything. And Acharya Prabhakar also said that sometimes Srila Prabhupada would chant kirtan for 3 days straight without eating and sleeping. He would just be doing kirtan on and on and on. And he said this was... He didn't specifically say, but Srila Prabhupada was into kirtan, and he would do it very intensely, because that was the mood that he had. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is that it's important because this was showing how Srila Prabhupada sometimes would do his bhajan, and how so intense he was in doing it. Because ordinarily as devotees, we'd never heard that like Srila Prabhupada would be chanting for 2 or 3 days straight. We heard that sometimes he wouldn't eat for long periods of time, especially near the end. But here he was actually doing kirtan for a long period of time without eating and no sleeping. And then that was remarkable. And the other thing is the result of his bhajan, and the result of the bhajan was that Krishna had appeared. And so I was taking it to heart that what Acharya Prabhakar was saying had some validity to it, because just the nature of Acharya Prabhakar, and he was very believable. And that basically was it with Acharya Prabhakar. There's a lot more. You can read it in Lilamrita, but there's more detail also. But that was very enlivening to hear.
Well, Srila Prabhupada told us that Late Prasad Thakur, who was the brother of his spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, became strained at a certain time. And they parted ways. Otherwise, for a while they were together. So Srila Prabhupada made a courtesy call to see him. I had been sent to go there ahead of time to find out the situation with Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, because he was living in a place called Dwadasa Mandira at Birnagar. And this is called Dwadasa Mandira because there's 12 like Shiva temples, all very little, small, beautiful little temples lined up in a row. And that means where you get the Dwadasa Mandir. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur spent a good section of his childhood there. There's a tree under which, mango tree under which he was seated. And it's a very beautiful place. And so we went to see, so I had initially talked with Lalit Prasad Thakur, and he was agreeable that ISKCON could do something. So then Prabhupada went there and discussed it with him. And it looked like they were going to give us, he had a big, I don't know exactly what the acreage is. Maybe it's like 25 acres of land, and maybe they would give us about half of it, where we could have a temple and do something for Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, which was on the side of a little pukur, a little water reservoir. And but the actual birthplace was a small little temple, which the door was broken off and it was in ill repair. And Prabhupada was practically crying when he saw that. So initially it seemed that things were working out. And then Prabhupada went a second time to kind of finalize everything. And Lalit Thakur, he's a very pure soul. He was like 97 years old at that time, if not 98. I think he lived to be 101, 102. And he would chant all the day. He'd just be chanting nonstop. There were deities upstairs on the second floor, and he had a library of all kinds of Bhaktivinoda Thakur books. And he had some disciples. It seemed one of his more intimate disciples was a very elderly lady, maybe in her 60s or 70s, who was called Bhakti Ma. And it was very impressive to see someone from a whole other era, like a century ago, you know. And he explained his own history that he was a lifelong brahmachari, never married. He was working for the government till he was maybe in his 50s as I forget what was the employment, something more like a clerical, white-collar thing with the government. And then he retired. And so now he was, but even throughout his life, he was doing sadhana bhakti. So it was nice to know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had more than one child that was active. And he actually had a lot of disciples. He was doing the Namhata preaching in Bangladesh and different parts of Bengal. But it was in a particular area. There was some disciple called Sachinanda, or Sachinanda, I think, who was actively preaching in the villages. This was kind of the backdrop. And then he was sitting in this little room on his bed, and he didn't move at this age. He didn't move much. Even he was bathed in his bed. I think he went to the bathroom in his bed, and they would brag that even though he would go to the toilet there, it smelled like roses, which is not the normal.
You experienced that?
I experienced that smell. There was no bad smell in the room. I can't say firsthand, you know. Yeah. But of course, with every person like that, they're surrounded by different people. And I think that his initial inclination was, as he had agreed with Prabhupada to do something jointly, but some of his followers had insisted that shouldn't give it. That's the impression I got. And the second time when Prabhupada went there, we were driving on the way to Calcutta and or Mayapur. It's about an hour drive from Mayapur. Then Prabhupada was given a seat, and he was discussing about developing the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But this time there was a different mood, and it was indicated that they weren't agreeable now to giving a portion or to have an agreement with ISKCON. And it was obviously they didn't have the capacity. They did some village preaching. They were enthusiastic in his presence to do some things, but it wasn't. They didn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to actually develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So the Prabhupada became very impatient. He became very upset that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was so great that he deserves to have really such a wonderful facility, a wonderful monument for his greatness. And Prabhupada had talked about a library, a display, an exhibition, an ashram, a preaching facility, and fixed up his birthplace temple. But everything was being canceled with no reason given. Okay, if they could do it was one thing. So then Prabhupada, he suddenly became very intense in a very loud voice. He was saying, isn't it sinful? Isn't it sinful if somebody can develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but you're not allowing? Or was it the opposite? Isn't it sinful that you cannot do it? That somebody cannot develop, that if somebody cannot develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and they won't let anyone else who could develop do it, then isn't that sinful? I think that was it's been quite a few years now. Because it was, so the question was, they had it, but they couldn't do it. We could do it, but they didn't want to let us. So then nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay status quo. It's going to stay in an undeveloped state. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, still to this day, is worse rundown than what it was then. And Prabhupada repeated this about 4 or 5 times, very loudly, almost, I wouldn't say shouting, but I would say just maybe one level below that. Very intensely, loudly declaring, asking us a question. And then nobody said anything. Then he walked out. As he went out, then he turned and there was a few of us, secretaries and assistants. Then he said, because I asked as a question, it was not an offense. I mean, he was kind. He was talking to someone, his brother, god brother, or something, of his own spiritual master. But he was put in a situation where Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his point of view, was being offended. And therefore, he thought he had a right, he expressed he had a right to question it, and by questioning it, it wasn't an offense. If he had accused, like, you're a nonsense, you didn't get, whatever, something like that, would have been offensive. But it's because he questioned, isn't it offensive? Isn't it offensive? Isn't it sinful? So that was an interesting understanding about how somebody can inquire, even if it's very intensively, but it's not technically an offense.
There was one morning when we, for some reason, everybody else was scrambling to get out of the cars, and it was just Tripurari, myself, and Prabhupada for a few minutes, for a few seconds. And first Prabhupada, some ducks were quacking. I'm just telling you this, I don't know. There were ducks quacking, and Prabhupada turned to us and said, we must save these mudhas. The quacking of the materialist. And then Tripurari said, Srila Prabhupada, is it true that the spiritual master will come back if the disciple falls down? Prabhupada said, yes, but don't take advantage. That was pretty clear.
So I was on the Radha Damodar party for a little over 2 years, and Prabhupada on an occasion would speak to us. He would come. He met us in different places in Chicago and then in Atlanta. And in San Francisco, we went one Rath Yatra with Prabhupada there. But when we were in Atlanta, Prabhupada gave us a personal darshan. And he was stressing the importance of brahmachari life. And he was saying how important in spiritual life it is to be brahmachari. And he told us, if you stay brahmachari, he was encouraging us to do that. You stay brahmachari, then there's 75% chance of you going back to Godhead in this very life. If you take up grihastha ashram, he said 25%. So he said, therefore, you should try to see all women as Mataji, as mother, and address them as that, my dear Mataji. That is a very respectful term, Mataji, meaning that just as your own mother you love and respect, the Mataji is even one of the gurus. He says one should not become father or mother. You know, there's the Pita Guru and the Mata Guru. So if you addressed all women as Matajis, you will not look at them as objects of sense gratification.
Harisuri Prabhu was ill, and he was replaced by Godrum Das Brahmachari, a good friend of mine, and to massage, because Godrum was also one of the bodyguards, strong-bodied. And I remember Godrum coming and telling me, says, boy, Srila Prabhupada reads minds. On his first massage, he had been massaging Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada had like, you know, a soft chest, and it made him think of women's breasts like that. And immediately Prabhupada said, he just like opened his mouth and started saying that the allurement of the illusory energy takes the form of breasts of a woman. And Godrum was like devastated. Prabhupada could read his mind. He came back and he, God, I'm not qualified to do this service.
So Prabhupada pointed to the skyline with his cane, and he said, you see this city? Not just this city, but all cities. Very soon they will collapse. And he said, and then Prabhupada asked us, do you know why? And Tamal Krishna immediately, there was maybe a hesitation, not everyone was wondering, but Tamal Krishna pretty quickly said, because they don't know how to grow food. I think everybody else was searching for some esoteric reason, and he gave a practical reason, and Prabhupada said yes. You know, which is the import of the whole purpose of our farm communities, which we still, you know, still are trying to, you know, grasp.
Prabhupada came out and sat on the Vyasasan, and the devotees were in a particularly ecstatic mood that day. And so they chanted for almost an hour. He said it was a huge Guru Puja, and they just chanted and chanted and chanted. Everyone was dancing in ecstasy. And so at the end, they offered their obeisances, and Prabhupada did the Jayom prayers, and then Prabhupada spoke, and he said, if you do this Guru Puja every day, you go to this Guru Puja every day with your God brothers and God sisters, he said, then any difficulty that you have between each other will be immediately dissipated. He said, any problems you have between each other will be resolved by the performance of Guru Puja. So Prabhupada stressed the importance of it. And I've also had personal experience that when you do really get into Guru Puja, you really appreciate your God brothers and God sisters, and especially you appreciate Srila Prabhupada.
Sometimes we would, I'd had the good fortune to ride with Srila Prabhupada from Calcutta, and sometimes I'd be here in Mayapur waiting for him to come. So on one occasion, there's a whole caravan of cars, and we're going out from Calcutta, and there's a little place, a little mango orchard. Used to be a big mango orchard, but what's left of it now is still there. A little piece was purchased by a devotee. And that was always Srila Prabhupada's favorite picnic spot. Every time he would stop there and have his breakfast, leave early in the morning, stop and have a breakfast picnic. So on the way driving out, there was an interesting pastime that Prabhupada had the Krishna and Balaram on the windshield of the car. And so he asked the devotees, well, who is more powerful, Krishna or Balaram? And then some said, well, Balaram, he's the more powerful, he's the older brother. And then some were saying Krishna. And then Prabhupada said, well, see, Balaram has his hand on Krishna's shoulder, so Krishna's holding up Balaram. So he's more powerful. Then we got to the mango orchard. And this time, one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, Damodar Maharaj, he was coming with us. So then Prabhupada had some mats set up, and he had a little portable table, and he was taking prasadam with Damodar Maharaj. He said the others could take also. We were a little off the grass mat, kind of in a distance around. And then sometimes Prabhupada would have that type of let everybody take with them picnic, so it was a little picnic in the garden. And I just remember one little thing is that after taking the fruit, he had some fruit, he gave Damodar Maharaj some fruit. Then he asked that he can serve Damodar Maharaj water. But Damodar Maharaj said, no, but after fruit we shouldn't drink water. And then Prabhupada said, no, but what you can do, the secret is you take a sweet. You take a sweet, then after sweet you must take water. And it doesn't, because if you just take water after fruit, it washes all the nutrition of the fruit out. But if you take a sweet, he said, then that somehow caps it, and you can take water after that, and your fruit nutrition won't be washed away. So something to remember when you get thirsty after taking fruit. Just take a nice Mahaprasad Sandesh or Rasagula, remember Srila Prabhupada, and chant Hare Krishna.
And then drink water.
And then drink a little water, yeah.
Another question I remember was Tripurari. There had been this discussion that about, by shaking the hands of the karmis when distributing books, that you're getting karma or something. And Tripurari mentioned it to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, I hope not.
So Kailas Chandradas got initiated in Chicago, and he was a real heavy controller type, Mars exalted, everything's. So Srila Prabhupada could see everyone, could see right through everyone, and so Srila Prabhupada could see right through him. And when he came to bow down, this is like when you're a controller, it's kind of hard when you bow down to someone. This is like a sensitive moment. You don't have control at this time. And as he bowed down, he said, your name is Kailas Chandra Das. Das, 1,000 times Das, not God, Das. And as Kailas Chandra, he's bowing down, he's going like, because Prabhupada was just boom, boom, boom. And he just said, when he got up, he just was like so amazed at this, how Prabhupada had treated him. He thought, what am I supposed to do with this?
The temple presidents and the GBC and sannyasis were with Prabhupada, and they were going on a morning walk. And Prabhupada was walking. He had his cane. He was walking along. They were going towards the Ganga. And so some of the leaders took that opportunity to start, complaining to Prabhupada that this person, he's in my zone, he's doing this, or he wasn't authorized, and this person's coming back and saying, Prabhupada, but this is going on, and these people are doing this and this, and one after another, people were lodging complaints and kind of doing a little backbiting. So Prabhupada was walking with his cane, he wasn't saying anything, and then all of a sudden Prabhupada stopped and put his cane down. And he turned around and he whipped his cane around and he went, all of you, made this big sweeping motion with his arm. He said, all of you have come simply to discourage, and I have come only to encourage. And then he did it again. All of you have come simply to discourage, and I have come only to encourage. And then he turned around and started walking. And all of a sudden, he said that all the Prabhus started going, please accept my humble obeisances, Prabhu, please accept mine, forgive my offenses. So I took that to heart, and I thought, you know, if I can remember this, whatever happens in my life and whoever I associate with, I think I can make a better impression by following this instruction of Srila Prabhupada.
So then Prabhupada had to wait for his flight. He was sitting in the waiting room. So then Jai Satchidananda Prabhu asked if he could do a bhajan or kirtan for Prabhupada. And I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of the classic famous ones that Prabhupada did. And he had it expertly, you know, he had every intonation, every syllable, just the way Prabhupada had done it. And Prabhupada was going like this, and every now and then he'd look over at him. And when he finished, Prabhupada leaned over and said, you listened very well, which I thought was very, he didn't say you chant very well, he said you listened very well. You know, so Prabhupada said that his qualification, that his spiritual master told him, was that you listen. You know, actually learn how to hear and listen.
In Chicago, Prabhupada had a big deity installation of Gaura-Nitai deities, 1975. And so there was like, I think, 4 sets of Gaura-Nitai deities, and to put on each one of the buses. So Prabhupada was saying, he was talking about Sankirtan and doing book distribution. And he said, if you, in the class, he was talking about Vishwamitra Muni had performed tapasya for 60,000 years, heavy tapasya. He said, so you can get the same benefit of this tapasya on a few days of Sankirtan. A few days on Sankirtan is equivalent to 60,000 years of tapasya by Vishwamitra Muni. And everyone was, Haribo! So that's the mercy of Srila Prabhupada to give us this great process.
As Gurukula closed down in Dallas, everyone knew they were going to move, and so I was in the position of like, okay, I was going to try to do another service. I was going to start looking for another service. I've been doing Sankirtan there and temple cleaning and so forth. And so I started writing a proposal to GBC about making films, and I put that together and passed it on to the GBC. And then GBC was non-committal, naturally, and so I started going directly to Prabhupada because the GBC just wasn't dealing with it. And I spoke with him in Vrindavan. And he was never very enthusiastic about my making films. I wrote him some letters, and he said, you know, Hitler and Napoleon, all these different people, you know, all made so much propaganda. And then what happened? Nothing happened, you know. It's like they're over, they're finished. So he was just, he was emphasizing book distribution. And I tried to appreciate that, but I had studied film in college, and I was really, you know, determined and anxious. And I still write scripts today, but it was just not to be at that particular time. Anyway, I remember talking with Prabhupada about it, and I'd sent him a draft, an outline of a film, and Harisari said, this is the boy who has sent you the draft, and the complete dismay on Prabhupada's face. It's like so devastating. It was so incredibly devastating, and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? You know. At any rate, I continued to play with. One time, Prabhupada, actually in talking with Prabhupada, well, that was in Vrindavan. So I went on. Treya Rishi was the only person in the GBC who had encouraged me with the film making idea. He said, why don't you come to Iran and we'll, you know, get you a job there and you can develop some skills and so forth. So I said, okay. He had, at that time, Navayovana was working with him, and Navayovana was into multimedia slideshows. So he thought, you know, then you could maybe partner up with him or something. So anyway, we went there, and Nav and I became friends. And then Prabhupada came to Iran. It was one of his last stops on his last tour of the world. He came to Iran, and he was there. And we were, you know, again, I presented the idea of the film and talked. I think that's where Prabhupada actually showed so much dismay. Anyway, and in Vrindavan, actually, he said, "Who is stopping you? Who is stopping you from doing this?" You know, and I could understand. He understood me very, very well. That I had my own limits, my own stops that were holding me back from doing what I supposedly said I wanted to do. So it was a very amazing experience. I had another experience in India. First time I came to India in '76 at the Delhi Pandal, and this is a very kind of comic experience with Prabhupada. I was always getting chastised by Prabhupada, it seemed like. You know, one time I went to sit down in Vrindavan, and Prabhupada gestured, you know, cover your feet, you know. So I covered my feet. And then another time I went to sit down, and before I even got down, he's, you know, gesturing again, cover your feet. You know, he remembered my faux pas. At any rate, in Delhi, a very strange thing happened. It was a big pandal, and Prabhupada went backstage at the end of the pandal. And I had been assigned to kind of, you know, one of the bodyguards, there are many of them, just to kind of keep the crowds back from. So as I was standing about here, these two girls from the side, you know, on my left, just kind of dove at Prabhupada's feet when he got to be about as far away as you are, you know, about, seemed like 6-8 feet or so. They just dove like dive bombers or something, you know, for Prabhupada's feet, which, you know, is the Indian thing. So Prabhupada was coming with quite an entourage behind him, and I thought, oh my gosh, these people are going to trip Prabhupada, and all these people are going to fall over Prabhupada. You know, it was like the weirdest story. And so I went down like this when these girls were diving, you know, like, you know, just hoping to kind of grab them in midair. I never even touched them. I never got, you know, close to them. But Prabhupada said, "Why are you pushing? Why are you pushing?" And I thought, God, you know, and I just, everybody stopped. Everything stopped, you know. We're talking about like 100 people back there, you know. And Prabhupada's looking at me, you know, just totally angry, totally upset. Why are you pushing? So every time I ever pushed anybody after that, I remembered that situation. And, oh my gosh, he was just giving me a warning or something. But I actually, there was no intention to push. I didn't push the girls. They just dove. And I was just trying to restrain, but it was useless. So anyway, I went to kind of a semi-conscious state, wandering around. And then Udayanand, I think it was Udayanand, came up to me and said, "Well, you really got the mercy. Wow, you really got the..." I thought, oh, is that what it was? I was like relieved. Anyway, so many of these experiences, I guess, is with the films and the dive bombers, the dive bomber devotees, and just the covering the feet thing, and letters about filmmaking and so on, and personal chastisements, the misconstrued massage. So, all these things they just. Krishna just arranged. I guess I just had more intense false ego than anybody else, and he just arranged that I would get smashed by my spiritual master. And for some time, I kind of took it in a negative way, especially when my sadhana started to slide a few years ago. I just started thinking, well, you know, it was like with the Smothers Brothers. Mom always liked you best. You know, he didn't like me that much, and you know. I made up a lot of stories, and but ultimately I can understand that that's my story, and that Prabhupada, the conclusion I came to after some soul searching, that Prabhupada really loved every one of his disciples, no matter what their faults were, their problems were, and that he wanted them to go back to Godhead. Otherwise, he wouldn't have bothered to come in the first place. And if he showed some exasperation with us, that was really quite good for us to try to get our act together a little better. And I feel, very, very blessed to have had Prabhupada's association in that way, If he had just encouraged me or flattered me or something like that, I would have probably doubted his perceptions even more. You know how self-doubt works. Anyway, so he gave me such an incredible, life, all the things that I've been able to do in ISKCON, places I've been able to go, and just the basic service, the sadhana, the programs, the chanting, everything, the association of devotees. Nobody could ever offer that, I don't think, to anyone else unless he was, pure personality, totally pure personality. It's just not, it's not forthcoming from anyone who has any taint of greed or selfishness. So that's practically the glorification I have for Prabhupada, is that he was, for all of us, he was such a wonderful beacon of light as to what Krishna wants for us. Krishna wants us to reappear in the spiritual world too. And Prabhupada's concern and efforts show us that.
I had just become temple president in 1976. Balavanta was now a GBC, so I became the temple president. So I'd always been used to being like, having an older godbrother there, and I just felt like I had risen to my level of incompetence, as you say. And I was thinking, why is everybody going to stay because of me, And I just felt alone, like I needed some older godbrother's guidance. So I was meditating like that for a couple of months, and then I was going to have a chance to, go see Srila Prabhupada for the Rath Yatra in Manhattan, in New York. And so I was going to get up the nerve and just say, look, Srila Prabhupada, I'm really honored by this opportunity to serve as a temple, but I think maybe think about someone else. I don't know if I'm competent or ready. And I was thinking like that. I feel like I was feeling alone. I kept thinking like that over and over again. So I go to his room, I get to go in, I pay my obeisances, I look up, and Srila Prabhupada was already engaged in conversation, so I don't know what happened before. But all I know is, I'm thinking, this is what I want to say. Prabhupada looks right at me and says, one thing is, even though I was in a foreign country, and I didn't know anyone, I never felt alone. He was saying it with such compassion, it was just like, and I was like, how did you know? I mean, he said, as long as I was following my spiritual master's instructions, I knew he was in my heart. I guess I didn't have anything else to say. I guess I was going to stay temple president for a while.
As we were walking out the door, we're all leaving. There was, about 80 of us. And Pragosh Prabhu, my dear friend, stopped and went to Prabhupada and said, Srila Prabhupada, thank you so much for bringing us to Mayapur, Sridham Mayapur. And Prabhupada said, oh, Sridham Mayapur is your home. This is your home. This is all of your home. He said, actually, the West is only for preaching and sense gratification. So if you're not preaching, you should be home. And Sridham Mayapur.
And then one time after the welcome address, he came upstairs and he sat down on his seat and he was just like relaxing, leaning back, and he took on his golden goblet, drink a little water, drink the water high. He just like sighed, like almost a sigh of relief, a sigh of satisfaction. He said, to be in Mayapur is so wonderful. If you live in Mayapur or if you die in Mayapur, it's all the same. So you were thinking, living or dying is the same. How is that, Srila Prabhupada? I said, well, Mayapur is the spiritual world. So if you're living in Mayapur, you're living in the spiritual world. And if you leave your body in Mayapur, if you die in Mayapur, you go back to the spiritual world. So both the same.
Right here in Mayapur, in the original building here, the Lotus building, all 6 vans were lined up. And Srila Prabhupada was in the morning walk. He'd go out to the main gate, and then off to the left, to the right, and he'd come back down the main road there at that time, which is the main walk now to the main gate. And so I was feeling quite ill. I had diarrhea, so I was feeling quite weak. I said, well, look, I won't fall asleep in class if I get some rest before class happens. I don't want to fall asleep in front of Srila Prabhupada. I don't want to fall asleep. So I said, now, if Srila Prabhupada came here, which van would he look in? The disciples thinking, oh, okay, I'm trying to outwit the spiritual master here, or think on his level. And so I said, well, okay, he'd check Gargamuni's, because that's the first one. He's coming from this way. I'll check Gargamuni's first. He might check the last one, maybe the middle one. He won't check the second one from the last, because that's our van, and he won't check that. That was the library party van. So I crawled in there. I had the key. I crawled in. I went to sleep. And the next minute I know it, the door's sliding open, and I see Gargamuni and Prabhupada looking at me. And Gargamuni just had thunder just burning me. And I just looked up and I was saying, oh my God. So I just offered my obeisances. And I just said, I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada, I'm sick. And he said, oh. And then he walked away. And I said, oh my goodness. I thought that I could outsmart the pure devotee. And you can never outsmart the pure devotee. So he knew to check the second van from the end. So I learned from that. You can never outsmart your spiritual master. So that was another extreme learning lesson from Srila Prabhupada.
It was the full moon night in the Sarat season. It was, I believe that's called the Rasa Purnima. So Krishna performs his Rasa Leela with the gopis. So Panchadevita Maharaj came in and said, Srila Prabhupada, you want to hear the chapters of the Rasa Leela? And Prabhupada said, yes, that would be nice. So Maharaj actually sat down. It's 5 chapters, right? 5. And so he starts reading. Now it takes about 3 hours to read the full, 5 chapters. So at that time I was massaging Prabhupada's feet. Actually, I got to massage Prabhupada's feet every day after that one day. So, it's like somehow or other I'd fit it in like I was Prabhupada's foot massager. So there I was in Vrindavan on Ras Purnima in Sri Vrindavan Dham at the lotus feet of the Jagat Guru at Krishna Balaram Mandir, listening to the Ras Leela of Krishna and the Gopis with his divine grace. So he's reading and reading, and I'm thinking, this is like, I can't get any higher than this, right? I was actually thinking, if I had any pious activity, I would die right now. Right now, if I died right now, that would be perfection. If I'm pious. If I had any pious credits, and of course I'm so sinful, here I am still, 25 years later, I'm still alive. But I was thinking, This is it. This is the perfection. Listening to Krishna Katha, serving the Jagat Guru's lotus feet in Vrindavan. So Maharaj is reading and reading and reading, and everyone's like listening, and I'm looking at Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada had his eyes closed, and then I started wondering, is he listening, or is maybe he dozed off, or and after about 2 hours, you know how in the Krishna book Prabhupada will quote different shlokas. So he made a quote, and Maharaj was reading the Sanskrit. It's like Priyamanani, right? And he said something Priyamanani or something, whatever. He mispronounced the word. And immediately Prabhupada went, Priyamanani. And then he went back and closed his eyes. So it was like, and again, all the hairs on my body stood on end because Prabhupada was in rapt attention. He was in samadhi. He was just absorbed in hearing the pastimes of Krishna from his own Krishna book. And so at the end, Maharaj said, Prabhupada, maybe we can do this every night. He said, yes. We're simply here to enjoy.
Before reaching that place, an amusing incident happened was they forgot to bring Prabhupada's prasadam tiffin. So I think it was someone, Tamal maybe. I'd asked Hari Sori if it was him. He said no, he didn't remember that. We came back to the second class to us and asked us if we had anything that Prabhupada could take. So I had purchased some fruit and we sent that. And he told us this following story, that when Srila Prabhupada had been informed that his prasadam tiffin wasn't there, so he just didn't say anything. But then as the train was pulling out of one station, one samosa wala was going by the windows, garam samosa, garam samosa, garam samosa. And just as the train was pulling away, Prabhupada put out his hand and stole a samosa and popped it in his mouth. And then afterwards said, a sadhu never goes hungry. So, very lucky samosa wala was missing one samosa like that.
About my initiation, first initiation, Kirtananda Maharaj gave a lecture before the actual fire yagya. I think he actually performed the yagya as well. Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasa. And he gave a lecture, Prabhupada wanted him to speak on the 10 offenses. And at one point, Kirtananda said, and you can chant any name of God. And Prabhupada said, any bona fide name of God. You can take that for whatever it means, for words, but it was a little reminder, any bona fide name for God.
We even had like kirtan competitions. Remember, one temple would come up, Chicago temple would do their thing, LA would do their thing, the Radha Damodar party would do their thing, London would do their thing, like that. So everyone was very fired up about chanting. But there was one of our godbrothers who didn't like it. So he was up in Prabhupada's room, and the Radha Damodar boys were up there. And so he said, Prabhupada, it's getting pretty crazy out there. All that dancing and like wild men. It's just completely crazy. Prabhupada stopped and went, yes. When you become a lover of Krishna, you dance just like a madman. So all the Radharama boys went, Haribo!
There was this local musician personality who'd been regularly coming to the Sunday feast. He was he was a drummer in a band that had in the South some recordings and airplay and things like that. But he was always coming. Then all of a sudden he shows up in what's his name, with the turbans, this Yogi Bhajan group. And so he's there at the Sunday feast, and people from Atlanta know who he was. He's like a local pop star. So, and he's wearing the turban and everything. But he'd always loved the devotees, but a little bit challenging, playfully. So he asked some question, and I can't remember the question, but the answer was what I remember. Because I don't think Prabhupada actually answered his question. He said, "You are very fortunate. You have accepted a bona fide guru, Guru Nanak. Now, don't be a hypocrite and follow." He said, and he said, "Study the Grantha," I think that's the way you pronounce it, "and chant Hari Ram, and read Bhagavad Gita," because that was also his instructions. And this is the same instruction that Prabhupada would give to Christians. And that in that Sunday Feast lecture, there was one of the devotees' father was there with his girlfriend. They were very challenging about Christianity. And Prabhupada just, he said basically the same thing, that we accept Lord Jesus Christ as our guru. And he said, now, and so you should follow your guru. And they said they did. And he said, "Do you eat meat?" Yes, you should follow the 10 Commandments. And they said they did. And I said, well, what about thou shalt not kill? I said, we don't kill. Well, what about, do you eat meat? And it was, Prabhupada handled them very well. I kept thinking at that point, it's like Prabhupada had said, I can speak like this because I'm an old man. He was very, but you cannot, maybe sometimes.
Prabhupada was very expert at receiving guests. One time in Mayapur, he was teaching us that the Gaudiya Math, they're very expert at taking care of guests. But we are not so expert yet. So he said that you should take very nice care when a guest is there, feed them nice prasadam, give them personal attention, ask how they're doing, ask what they need, and then a big VIP came, a commissioner from the government. So Prabhupada said, I'm going to show you now. And then he sat there and he was saying, give him more water, give him more rice, give this. And the person was so flattered that the Acharya is personally overseeing my meal. And then sometimes Prabhupada would tell even almost like jokes. And then he said, we were kind of looking, like we never saw Prabhupada just like tell jokes. So he said, see, during prasad should be light talk. It's good for digestion. Like everything heavy, preaching heavy while somebody when they're trying to eat.
Srila Prabhupada, after he came to Atlanta, was asked what was it about Atlanta that pleased you so much? Because he had done all things that he hadn't done, before, or maybe, just the drum class and all that. And he was definitely very pleased. Everyone could see it. And Prabhupada's response was, when I saw how all the devotees were cooperating together to please me, that's what pleased me. And so to me, because like Prabhupada, the famous instruction that Prabhupada said, in his last days, your test for your love for me will be, how you cooperate. So I think if we can reflect on those past, for me, those 3 days was a time, because like for one instance, that was a time in our movement. Of course, we didn't have the other issues that we have now, but there was the Radha Damodar book distribution, Brahmachari, Sannyas versus Grahastha. So they were all there. And as a matter of fact, I believe Tamal Krishna introduced each Brahmachari to Srila Prabhupada for the first time up in his room. It was very sweet. But during the Sunday Feast lecture, one of the Brahmacharis in the question and answer period asked Srila Prabhupada, what pleases you the most? And this was like, there was this hush, a pregnant pause. This was it. Everyone was waiting. And Prabhupada he's like sort of chuckled, he just, if you love Krishna, if you chant Hare Krishna. It was just, I still get goosebumps thinking about that one, you know.
So Bhakti True Swami, he came in early 77, and Prabhupada immediately gave him first and second initiation and said, he is not a new man, this movement. And then about, I don't know, a couple weeks later, Prabhupada was up on the Lotus building, just with Bhakti True Swami. And they were walking together. And Prabhupada said, you have had billions of births. Billions. And all of us have had billions of births. And we've always given those births and those lives simply to sense gratification. He said, if you give one birth to Krishna, you will not be the loser. See what happens. You will not be the loser. Just give one to Krishna. And he said, and if you're not satisfied, you still get more births. I mean, Prabhupada was like, matter of fact, it's just like saying, the sun rises every single day. So Prabhupada is also looking at the transmigration. You'll get more births. Don't worry. You can get billions of births. But give one to Krishna and see what happens. And so, like, a week later, he took sannyas. And he's maintained his sannyas vows ever since by giving this one birth to Krishna. So, at any point in time, you can give the birth to Krishna. That's what I'm hoping.
Dadi Bhakshadas was albino body, Prabhupada disciple. Very innocent, very boyish-like, small. And he was on a morning walk. He told me this. He was on a morning walk, which would go, in Kartik, they'd go around the temple. And Prabhupada said if you do circumambulation around the temple, then it's just like seeing all the holy places. So as they're going around, Tamal Krishna is there, all the heavy sannyasis, Tamal Krishna, Adikeshwar, all these different sannyasis are there. And Dadi Bhaksha is way in the back. And Srila Prabhupada was talking something about Krishna. And so Krishna likes sweets. And the Dadi Bhaksha from way in the back interjects, Srila Prabhupada, I like sweets. Everything stops. Everyone turns around and looks. And you can just see the arrows from the sannyasis. You're on, you know, what is this? Prabhupada said, so your name is Dadi Bhaksha. He was initiated on the spot. Dadi Bhaksha Das. And everybody went, Jai Prabhupada! On the spot initiation. You know, it was like, you know, it was complete, perfect. Yeah. Prabhupada was like that. Soft as a rose, hard as a thunderbolt. Soft as a rose. You thought the thunderbolt was coming, and then the rose. Initiation on the spot.
Srila Prabhupada, gave the instruction that after we did the plays, he said, you should do more of these plays on that same standard. That will do good for you and for all who see. That standard was, I took it to mean that, one, it was directly from his books. You know, I don't see anything wrong with anecdotal that are also from his analogies, those types of, but this was a pastime directly from his books, and it was well rehearsed. So for all those temple presidents out there, they need to be rehearsed. You know, the spontaneous plays. Prabhupada himself said that he was in a play that was rehearsed, I think, if I remember correctly, was 1 year that they rehearsed it. This one was not 1 year, but we rehearsed almost every day for several weeks. And we did a dress rehearsal the week before. So that's what I think the same standard means.
Yeah, I remember one time, Prabhupada called Bhakti True Swami over to him and came to him very humbly serving Prabhupada. And Prabhupada started talking to him in Bengali. And then Bhakti True Swami started laughing, and Prabhupada started laughing. And I was like completely obvious. They were sharing this really intimate Bengali moment. And, that sweet smile that Bhakti Swami had, Prabhupada was smiling and was enjoying this like rasa with them. And I was thinking, he's so fortunate he can talk directly to Prabhupada in his native tongue. I was thinking, I wonder what that joke was about, you know. But Prabhupada was carrying on like that, and finally Prabhupada, he was doing so many things and looking, he said, look at this bodies. It's useless, completely useless. And he said, I am practically proving that life does not come from a bag of bones. We kind of half chuckled and half were like stunned in amazement. He was just so, he just transcended the whole situation. But just defying the logic of science and practically proving that life does not come from a bag of bones.
No, there was one thing that was very heart-melting that happened in Bombay. It was 1977, because we were in the library program, so we were getting a lot of interviews and book reviews. Interviews and book reviews. I mean, but people would write reviews. So Vyasky had collected a lot because there was Mahavishnu, Prabhavishnu, myself, Bir Shringa, all sannyasis now. And so we had taken Yagyadas, Nishringa Chaitanya, and Abhinanda, of course. Prabhupada had taken these reviews and of his books up to Srila Prabhupada. And when Srila Prabhupada started reading them, Prabhupada started crying. Now for a disciple, that is the utmost thing if you can do some service, where Srila Prabhupada started crying. So when Gargamuni came back and told us, I mean, that is like the most, you feel successful, you've done something in your life that is very pertinent. Very successful, you could say. You feel complete.
When we first arrived in Vrindavan, it was the day after, or maybe it wasn't the day after actually, anyhow. We arrived in Vrindavan and checked into the guest house, Krishna Balaram guest house, Govardhan Das and myself. And we were in our room like 3 minutes, and we heard a knock on the door. It was Upendra. He said, Prabhupada wants to see you right away. So, you know, he asked for Govardhan because he was temple president. And they just had this magnificent wedding for Leka Shavanti, which is Walter Reuther's daughter. And, you know, it was a big splash. Ambarish was like the best man. So was Ford and Reuther, and Time Magazine covered it, New York Times, it was Chicago Tribune, Detroit Free Press, everything. Covered the whole country, tremendous, tremendous publicity, and it was a magnificent preaching opportunity. And as they say, they got reviews. So Prabhupada asked, you know, to see Govardhan. So we came out of the room. We hadn't seen Prabhupada yet. And we went into as you go into the room now, and I'm not sure if it was the same layout or what, but you know how it has Prabhupada's like office. So we kind of went through there. We didn't go directly in Prabhupada's bedroom. Went through the office, and then we went around through the garden, Prabhupada's garden. And we met with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Tamal stopped and said, listen, before you go in to see Srila Prabhupada, I just want to prepare you for it. He says, when you see Prabhupada, it'll be like you've never seen him before. It's not Prabhupada robust and healthy, and you know, it might be a little shocking and painful for you. He said, but don't cry. He didn't want to create any anxiety for Prabhupada. He said, don't cry. He says, and don't say anything negative just say encouraging things. We're just trying to say encouraging things to Prabhupada, to uplift Prabhupada's spirit, to make Prabhupada feel enthused, to go on preaching and staying with us for another at least 10 years. So don't look shocked, don't be sad. So we thought, okay, we're prepared, mentally to do this. So we came around the head of Prabhupada's bed and we went to Prabhupada's feet and we offered our obeisances, and then we stood up and we saw Prabhupada laying there. And it was shocking to see Prabhupada in that condition. And immediately Govardhan lost it, and he had a chadar and he covered his mouth and he was sobbing quietly. And Prabhupada said, he smiled and said, "Oh, who is this? Who has come?" We were standing right at Prabhupada's foot of Prabhupada's bed. And Tamal said, "It's Govardhan and Udayananda from Detroit, Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, how are you? Is your accommodations okay? Did you get prasadam? Are you comfortable? Is everything okay? Is this nice? Is Krishna Balaram guest house okay for you? I said, yes, Srila. Govardhan couldn't talk. He was weeping. And I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, it's first class. Thank you so much for taking such good care of us. And he said, and are the devotees in Detroit, are they happy? Are they taking prasadam? And are they happy in Krishna consciousness? And how is Lake Shavanti and Ambarish? Prabhupada asked about Ambarish. And are they happy in chanting Hare Krishna? And are they happy in Krishna consciousness? And how is the temple and deity worship and the neighborhood? Are you preaching in the neighborhood? And Prabhupada just went on, and he was just talking about everyone else's well-being. He just was like, he was in this condition that it was explained to me that the Kaviraj who was treating Srila Prabhupada had treated thousands of people with the same condition. And he said, and it's so painful that the people literally writhe in pain. It's so painful, they can barely tolerate the pain. They become incoherent. They become beside themselves, delirious. And Prabhupada was not only so crystal clear in his consciousness, but he was just concerned about the well-being of others. Never once did he say, oh, look at my condition, look at how I'm suffering, look at this. This is all due to this, that, and the other. Never once. It was just, how are you? And I was trying to, wrap my mind around, how could a person be like this, in this condition? So selfish.
I was amazed at Srila Prabhupada's being able to transcend his bodily condition. For example, I was there when, right near the end, and the Kaviraj, they had flown up from Calcutta, one of the best. Prabhupada had a dream about this Kaviraj. And he was a really excellent Kaviraj. You could see he was dhira, he was a sober practitioner, very Brahminical like that, and very, very reverential to Prabhupada. And he was from the Sri Sampradaya, big white and red tilak. And one day he told, I got this second hand, from perhaps Harisori, but he said, I had doubt that your Guru Maharaj was actually a Paramahams saint. But he said, I have assisted, thousands of people dying. And usually in this condition, when there's no more muscle and fat to cushion the nerves from being pressed against the bone, he said, people are in such agony that I have to administer morphine. And he says, your Guru Maharaj never manifests the slightest expression of pain. And I saw this, for example, in around April or so, March, April in Bombay. Srila Prabhupada's tooth had his whole jaw swell up. And like when we get toothache, we can't tolerate it. But Prabhupada just tolerated it. You never saw any difference in his mannerisms, in his way of dealing with anyone, or never complained. In fact, when the devotees, I remember that, him trying to induce him that to take care of his body, Prabhupada wasn't agreeable. It was totally transcendental of being his body. So right up to the end like that, was very, very evident that Srila Prabhupada was a successful Ashtanga yogi, for me at least. That he had totally transcended his bodily conception. And he was a true living saint.
I asked Prabhupada once on one of his visits to Dallas, I said, how can we repay you? And so Prabhupada just quiet for a minute, and then he said, well, you can't repay me, but you should always feel very obliged, always feel very obligated. And so, that's been, for me, that has been the thing in my life, even when I don't feel very confident in devotional service, or don't feel turned on about devotional service, or allow politics to get in the way and so forth, is that I still have that obligation to my spiritual master. And that responsibility, is a perfect gift, actually, to feel that there is something important for one to do. I remember as a child feeling there's something very important I have to do in this life. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is, but I'm going to do something that's going to be very important. So that could translate into becoming successful in material sphere, or it could translate into becoming, just a loving servant of Krishna, just on a very simple level. And the thing that Prabhupada was such a simple person. His activities were so simplified. He didn't complicate his life with so much stuff. I remember seeing him once at Gurukula. The children had given him pictures of Krishna, and their drawings. So he was looking through them, and I was thinking, well, these are really wonderful. They're pictures of Krishna from little pure devotees, and and then Prabhupada just put them down and walked away, and he wasn't interested in taking anything. He accepted things, but then he just distributed them again. He just never was the kind of mind I have, is I'd take the picture and put it on the wall, and so forth, the treasure and all this stuff. But he was just going on and on and on. Everywhere he went, he was just constantly going through this exchange, accepting people's adulation, their worship, and then offering that to Krishna. And he was never bogged down by any of that. He never got overwhelmed by it. He never got his ego out of joint by doing those things. So those are the incredible impression I had of Prabhupada, is that he was a perfect living being, and that his desire was to make us also perfect in our relationship with Krishna.
My godbrother, Pragosh Prabhu, one time he went to Washington, D.C., where Prabhupada was at, and he was distributing books at the airport. But he was actually based in New York. And one day he came back from Sankirtan, and Prabhupada saw him. And he was just getting out of the van, and Prabhupada said, "Where have you been?" He offered his obeisances, and he said, "Where have you been?" He says, "I've been out distributing books, Srila Prabhupada." And he said, "Come with me." So Prabhupada took him into his room. And so, he had you'll have to ask him about all the details, but one of the things that was very charming that Prabhupada said was, he said, "So where are you doing your service these days?" And he says, I'm in New York, Prabhupada, in the 55th Street Temple. And he said,
"Oh, you're in New York?" He said, "I also started in New York." As if, not every single devotee in the movement knew everything about Prabhupada, especially where he started, but Prabhupada was thinking like that. I started in New York, like that. So Prabhupada was, Prabhupada was talking in Vrindavan. He was talking about going to Govardhan. He was thinking about Govardhan, and of course they were making plans to go to Govardhan and so on, and like that. But he wasn't always, Prabhupada wasn't like just focused on Govardhan. As a matter of fact, when different things came in, different news items came in and letters would come into Prabhupada, Prabhupada would become inspired. So something came in about the preachers in New York, what the preaching that was going on, the book distribution was going on. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's what I should do. I should simply give up laying here in Vrindavan. I should go out and preach. And he said, I should go. You should take me to the New York temple. And he says, and if I die, you should put my tomb on top of the New York temple, Radha Govinda temple on 55th Street. He says, I want to die preaching with my New York preachers, like that. So we can only know how important that temple was to Prabhupada. And of course, what a catastrophe it is, having lost that temple. Prabhupada said, place my tomb on the top of 55th Street Temple.
Another very great saint that I had the great fortune to meet was Devraha Baba. And this was in 1978. We went with the Gurukul boys. The Samadhi planning office was on the ground floor of the Gurukul building in Vrindavan. So I came close with Yashodananda Swami. We went for the Magh Mela in Allahabad. And Devraha Baba was always there. And he was so famous, he's like 800 years old, that his house is on stilts. So when we went with the Gurukul kids, he came down. He never comes down because everyone tries to touch his feet. But he came down and he glorified Srila Prabhupada in Sanskrit or whatever for almost 10 minutes. Shaktavesh Avatar, this and that. And he had all his disciples called. And he was so old, he was just holding a skin in front of himself. And he was so old that even his eyebrows were dreadlocked and hanging down on the other side, like this. And he called some of his other disciples who were also, I would say, into the 200, 300, 400 years old. But it was very significant how nicely he had, this greatest, most respected saint of India, had so wonderfully glorified Srila Prabhupada. A funny thing happened was when Prabhupada departed, there was like a cyclone that swept through India. I'd actually been there until the Sunday night before, but then I had to get back because at the same time I was doing the Makrana supervision for the marble work. And I had to get back. I had delayed it about 2 weeks because we were all feeling Prabhupada was close to departing. But then I just thought, no, I have to go and do my service. And I got in that Sunday night, and then around 3 in the morning, Siddhartha woke me up. We were sharing the same brahmachari room. He said, Prabhupada, yes, Prabhupada. Immediately got up and offered my obeisances. And I looked, and it was 3 in the morning. And then Siddhartha said, oh, must be dream, must be dream. And then we tried to take rest again, and the next thing, this cyclone just swept through India. And this huge neem tree just keeled over. Wham! Just woke up the whole neighborhood there. And then the next morning we heard Prabhupada had departed. And our immediate amongst brahmacharis were thinking, wow, Prabhupada came and took his neem tree. But I remember in the newspaper, in the Bombay Times or whatever, that spoke of that very weird kind of snapstorm that had swept throughout India. And that in Madras they had a tidal wave. And on top of the tidal wave there were flames. And there was a photo of that right in the front page of the newspaper. And we were thinking, wow, how inauspicious the departure of a pure devotee, the symptoms are there.
Jai Anilo Prema